Why, hello there. It's been a minute since I've had a chance to actually sit down and record one of these things. Pardon the headphones, they were for making sure the setup was actually working right. So, I am back because I moved. I'm in a different location now. And it took a while to get everything set back up, but I've moved. I'm back. I will be making content again. And today, I wanted to talk about a book. An old book. Well, a bunch of old stories, rather. So I read a book that was the collected stories of Bran Mak Morn, or about Bran Mak Morn, by Robert Howard. Now, Robert Howard obviously is most famous for Conan the Barbarian, and these stories were written before Conan, but they were written after one of his other very famous characters, if you're into him, into Howard, and into the sword and sandal or sword and sorcery type things, Cull the Barbarian. So, in the order of which Howard wrote them, he wrote all the Culls he wrote, then he stopped. Then he wrote all the Bran Mak Morns, then he stopped. And then he wrote all the Conan the Barbarians. Now, if you're a little bit of a Howard fan, you know that these are actually all based in the same world, which is technically our world, and they are separated by thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. So, Bran Mak Morn is an interesting character, a proto-Conan, if you will, though he is very different. It is not that Conan was the better version of Bran, just like Bran isn't the better version of Cull. They are different characters and they're telling different kinds of stories. So let's start from the top. What's Bran Mak Morn about? Bran Mak Morn is a late Roman era king of the Pict people. Now, the Picts were first unveiled in the Cull series, where they were one of the people at the same time, around at the same time as Atlantis. Cull's best friend was a Pict. There were a variety of types of people that the Picts were. Later on in Conan, the Picts were always at the frontier of civilization and represented the danger of civilization collapsing and going back to a darker age. In Bran Mak Morn, it's neither of those things. It's neither equal to civilization, nor is it the danger of barbarism. It is actually much more of an interesting niche that they sit in. So in the stories, they're constantly talking about them being a Stone Age people, a people who time has left behind, right? It's not that they're threatening to overwhelm the world. It's not that they're threatening to catch up to the world. They are stuck in a prior age. And part of that is because the people, in a very 1920s, 1930s kind of way, have racially degenerated, meaning that it's kind of implied that their genetics got all messed up, to put a modern understanding on it. And our main character is less messed up. He's more human and less ape-like because of carefully managed bloodlines. So Bran is a king of the Picts. Now, at that time, the Picts were assumed to be a Roman-era people in the far north of Britain at that time, and that they resisted the Roman invasions of Scotland, basically. And so Howard takes that little piece of information and from it spins out a vast cosmology of these Picts. We don't have the Conan stories yet, so even though they'll one day be fit in there, what we have instead is a knowledge of the Picts from a great catastrophe through the Stone Age as we know it, where they were a dominant force, and then they get pushed farther and farther away because they cannot adapt to civilization. And interestingly, that's kind of relatively connected to a one modern-ish theory about Neanderthals, which is also controversial. Well, maybe not controversial, but is argued against. I know, in a number of ways. But that the Picts are people who can't adapt. Bran is a man who can think very far. He's a barbarian king, so he is a man of action, like Kull and Conan, but he's very much a king, and he's a thinker. He understands the doom that will befall his people. Doom is a very important piece of Howard fiction. In Kull, everyone knows that the whole world is doomed, that they have gone past the peak of civilization onto a decadent decline where they will inevitably collapse. In Conan, the people don't understand that they're doomed, but the reader is constantly reminded that one day the Picts will rise up and wipe everything that's there away. They will destroy all of civilization, and the world will be in a state of barbarism. Here, it's that civilization can't be kept up with. The forces of civilization are overwhelming the Pictish people. And Bran, it's not that he's against civilization. He's trying to forge what are a loose alliance of tribes into a true kingdom, a true entity that could then grow and move forwards, but he knows that he can't do it. It's from the very beginning. Bran will die eventually, and the kingdom will collapse. Like, that's just understood, and that he was the last chance the Picts had to not be totally overwhelmed by history. So it's very interesting the way that doom lingers very differently over our three barbarian kings. Bran himself is both at once truly ruthless, but very compassionate for his people. He is a warrior king, but is not above using any wily thing that's available to him, any stratagem, any magic, whatever's available to him, he will grab hold and make use of. Another difference, in case you're more familiar with to compare our barbarians again. Compare our barbarians. So, Conan, the most famous, is also a very famous womanizer. Every third Conan story has buxom babes described in detail. Part of that's because that's what sold print. So, also men in Conan sometimes have like a homoerotic level of detail to them, because I guess that's also what sold print. Or I guess if you're writing it for one, write it for both, I guess. But yeah, Conan was constantly, there was a damsel in distress who was very, comely, and Conan had many partners. Kull was actually an interesting representation of an asexual. Women tried to woo him with their wiles, and he cared not. He cared for violence. He was representative of a violent streak of barbarism that was actually what the decadent civilization needed to try to slow its decline. Bran doesn't have that many stories, but in them, women aren't a constant mention. So in one story, it's actually told from the perspective of a mercenary for a Roman merchant or for a Roman legate who's doing the work of a merchant to go and kidnap a pretty Pict girl to be a slave. And the Picts successfully defend. And so that's a different kind of story, because that's not exactly a sexualization or anything like that. In another story, he has contact with a woman who is how to say, a there are races older than the Picts that have been driven beneath the ground, and this was actually this was Conan by way of Lovecraft, if you would. Bran makes allies, kind of, with a race so old and buried deep beneath the ground, chased by the Picts when the Picts moved to Scotland, that they warped and changed. And there was a part, these things that creep underneath the skin, underneath the ground, of horrific form and shape. Half that, half more regular human woman, who was the connection. Not described as pretty in any way, shape, or form. And the only person who Bran has relations with. And what's interesting is she demanded it as payment to be touched and not struck, as payment for her services. And he was just like, whatever, for my people, I'll go through whatever. Even though he was disgusted by it. And that's really all we have in terms of women with Bran Mak Morn. So Bran is immediately both more of a tragic figure. He's not on adventures. He's not doing, court intrigue. He's fighting the rearguard action from, trying to prevent his people from reaching their inevitable doom. Now, so this is the copy I had, right? This actually had a couple unpublished stories and connected stories in it. And so what's interesting is one of Howard's additions to the Cthulhu mythos is the book Unnamed Cults by von Jürgen, I believe. That was a Howard invention that was incorporated into the mythos. And actually, one of the stories in here brings that up and actually connects it to this notion of the Celts versus the Picts. And Bran Mak Morn becomes a deity, functionally, of a cult. And he features in two stories that way. He features in two different stories as the center, the idol, the god of the cult of the Dark Man. And one of those is interestingly set in the modern day, kind of. And another is set in a later Viking era, where it's Celts and Vikings. And he is the Picts are in their final last gasp remnants. So, it's Bran Mak Morn, I think the stories are good, particularly The Worms of the Earth. That is spooky, scary, Lovecraftian. It's Lovecraft meets Conan in a great way. I think that if you're interested in the evolution of fantasy, different ideas that can be explored in fantasy, if you're interested in the evolution of Howard as a writer, the evolution of writers in general, these stories are good. They're good, but they, more than that, are informative and interesting to analyze. They're informative about Howard and his notions of world building, and they're very interesting to analyze through that lens. So I think I recommend you find them, whichever stories you can find, because they're not long reads. They're very easy reads. They happen to be relatively short, maybe 20 pages, 30 pages, and they're good. But beyond that, if you can read them and think about what these stories are trying to say about the world, especially in contrast to Kull or Conan, I think these make for very interesting stories. So that was my thought about that. Probably the oldest thing that I've reviewed here on the channel. But I'm back now, and hopefully I will be able to do more on here. actually somewhat related, I hope to record some videos of Hellblade 2 and post them here in just a little bit. Well, that's it for now, though. Subscribe, like, leave comments, questions, what have you, about Bran Mak Morn or whatever. And I will try to, keep stuff happening. And I'll catch you guys next time. All right. Bye-bye.